Howdy, and welcome to the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast, brought to you by the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences program at Texas A&M University. I am your host, Kenrick Davies, former high school physics and astronomy teacher and current program manager for Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences. This podcast is meant to provide a little more insight and information to those seeking a secondary content teacher certification in Texas. We aim to provide episodes that help pre-service educators on the path to certification, as well as leverage the experience of myself and other guest speakers to support teachers in the first few years in the classroom. And today's topic is a continuation of one that we've been going on for a little bit. It's going to be our series of inquiry in the classroom. And today we're going to be talking about inquiry in the mathematics classroom. And so we have a guest in the studio with us today, and that is Dr. Jennifer Austin, who is a professor of instruction in the Department of Mathematics at the University of Texas at Austin, as well as an undergraduate mathematics faculty advisor. So welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Yeah, we love talking with our college faculty. I say ours loosely because I know you are part of our rival at UT Austin, but I think this is a great connection that we have here. We love talking to faculty about their experiences in education, as well as their thoughts about how we can do some really, really awesome things in the classroom. And I know you have got some research behind you around some things involving inquiry. But let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about who you are, your background in teaching, and what do you enjoy most about it?
So I grew up on a farm in rural Tennessee, and neither of my parents or any of my grandparents even had college degrees. So I didn't know what opportunities there were out for me out there, but I always loved math and really got excited about math around 8th grade when we had a new teacher and she was offering Algebra 1 in the 8th grade for the first time. And she invited me to be like on a little math team, and we stayed after school and practiced. And I really found out I love math and I love doing it and solving the puzzles, and won a regional Algebra 1 contest in 8th grade. And so
nice.
That was really me finding my identity, because I was the quiet, shy girl from the farm and went into the little town for school. So I was a bit of a misfit and otherwise. And then my freshman year of high school was asked to tutor a senior football player in math. So I thought that also. So I kind of gained my identity. And then throughout high school, when a teacher was absent in math, they'd say, "Jennifer, can you help out?"
I love it.
We didn't have AP classes or anything like that, but I had very caring teachers who realized I could probably do something and encouraged me and supported me along the way. Then in undergrad, I went into math and also pursued secondary education certification, but this was in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. One of my classes in college was geometry, a college geometry class, and it was held in a conference room, just so a big table in the middle and chalkboards around the side of the walls. Right. And there was this retired professor who only taught that class in his retirement state. And there was a formal textbook. He just had he had copied what looked to be typewritten pages, copied all these pages of problems and a few definitions sprinkled throughout, but mostly problems. And he gave those to us at the beginning of the semester. And so we all put them in loose leaf notebook folders ourselves, and then we would come to class and he'd say, "All right, for the next class, why don't you try our problems 12 through 27 or something?" And then we'd come to class, sit around that table and say, "Jennifer, see what you did with number 16, build the board." And so you just pop up to the board and you just try to work through it. And but it was a small class, like I said, around the conference table. We were all math majors. And he had this very calm demeanor. And so it may sound intimidating, but it actually was very motivating. And we really learned and we progressed. And we were proving things, there weren't statements typed up in a textbook with proofs given in a textbook. So we felt like we were proving it. We were producing the mathematics. So that was my first taste of inquiry-based learning, not knowing that's what it was called necessarily or anything. And then when I graduated with my bachelor's, I did go back in rural West Tennessee to teach. I taught mathematics and physics because I was the only person taking physics in college at the high school. So they said, "Here, you can teach physics too." And so I was teaching like 5 different subjects, and many of your listeners probably can relate to that.
Yeah, probably.
But it was challenging, but very rewarding. but I kept wondering, could I do something more? And so then I went. University of Memphis was offering an evening course in real analysis for area high school teachers, and potentially to lead you back to a master's program. Well, that did lead me to a master's, and then I wanted more, and ended up getting my doctorate in mathematics. And then actually my area was in knot theory, KNOT, and that's a branch of topology. And so that there were great people, and my PhD mentor had connections here at Austin. And so I landed here at UT Austin and postdoc role. Back then, and I came to UT in 2007, and we would get a teaching mentor and a research mentor. So I should mention Yuri Treisman was my teaching mentor way back then, and formed a good relationship with working with Mark Daniels and Mike Starbird, and they had a little inquiry-based learning community going, and so I embraced that. And after my postdoc, I married an Aggie and ended up staying here in Austin. So I transitioned into the instructional track, and
That's great.
Yeah, so.
Well, I guess we'll have to claim you then if you married into the family. So, no, it's awesome, and hearing your story, I feel there's so many other stories that sort of echoed in there about how a teacher can certainly just change the track of a student's whole life, their career. And it sounds like you had several really, really awesome teachers just kind of sprinkled in at the most important parts of your life, and that kind of directed you in a lot of really, really awesome directions. And I think that's just the power of the teacher exemplified right there, right? I mean, we hear this time and time again about how a teacher is the most important part of the classroom. So great. And you've already talked about inquiry-based learning. That's our topic. So what does that mean to you? What does inquiry-based learning mean to you, and how does it look in your own classroom?
So I get to teach a variety of classes, and over my now 18 years at UT Austin, I've taught quite a number and a variety of sizes and different audiences. Every math department's a service department to a lot of different entities. So I've taught calculus and through upper division, and now I get to, in the past 3 years, I've been teaching the first course our graduate students take in how to be an effective teacher. And so that's been a lot of fun. But I do still teach M302 Introduction to Mathematics. That's the broad mathematics that predominantly non-STEM majors take. And I redeveloped that now several years ago, and I actually enjoy teaching that more than calculus. I hope that's what you say. I have a lot of fun with that class. And it's a large class, so 90 to 120 students is large for that class. But then I still do get to teach some of the upper division math major type classes like theory of interest and our introductory proofwriting class. And so I've kind of settled into those four set of courses pretty much. The big 302 class, the graduate teaching class, intro to proof, and theory of interest class. And I have tried a lot of things, and one thing I do is I make myself try something new every time I teach a course, especially if it's a repeat course, because that's fun for me. And one great thing about the pandemic was all the online learning. As a working mother, I really appreciated that, and I got to go to a lot of professional development workshops and meet with a lot of people. And then there were problems we were trying to solve. So I got it myself in little groups where people from universities around the U.S. were getting together and saying, "How do we deal with this? That's suddenly a new problem," and such.
Right.
So I've learned a lot from others, and found the COMMIT community, COMMIT, and that is an entity across the U.S. with local not formally chapters, but local groups, let's say. And there's a COMMIT group out of San Antonio that I have joined in some sense. And so they have workshops like 6 times a year or so with folks that are interested in inquiry learning. Anyhow, I endeavor to do some inquiry learning no matter what size my class is and what the class is, because for a lot of reasons, it's benefited me personally. I grew up extraordinarily shy. But this type of learning environment helped me find my voice and found me then where I am now, 30-something years in front of a classroom.
Nice, yeah.
And so I know it can be beneficial. It encourages everyone in the classroom to be active and engaged and take ownership of at least pieces of what's being produced. And so I find that gives everyone a place to enter the conversation. And I find that to be beneficial. From my side now, I found it to be a whole lot of fun to teach this way and very boring to just lecture. And
Uh,
um, I like to be in a classroom where students are active and engaged and talking
mhm.
and maybe getting noisy, and where I can listen to the conversations they're having. I find it very rewarding to hear what their conversations are and how they're thinking through things. And
Sure, and
um,
it's a great way for a teacher to learn what's happening in the classroom, right? That
yeah.
whole idea of formative assessment and walking around and knowing the pulse of the classroom and where everyone is. Yeah, it's a great skill.
So, what it can look like is a lot of different things. So, in the class of, 95 to 120 or so, we now have two undergraduate class assistants that are employed by our department that help with each section of that class. And so they're in the classroom with you every day, and that helps a lot. Predominantly because that particular class, I bring a lot of manipulatives to the classroom as well. And so they're helping me pass those down, collect those up. But there also, then there's three of us in that large room at least. And because I get to teach like that introductory proofwriting class for the math majors, I typically pick people out of there and say, hey, you'd be a great undergraduate class assistant for this. That's a whole nother benefit to a math major. But anyhow, I handpick the people that are in that classroom with me and with the other 302 instructors. And they are really good people then to move around and help with the group work and yeah, I do. Even in that class, I get students up front sometimes. And certainly, I can't get all 100 or so of them up front, but I have the luxury of picking my classroom now, and so I'm in the queue early every time for the class. And there's this one great classroom. It does have the long tables, but then on up and down on the table there are these microphones that the students can just touch and then speak. They don't have to lean over. It's a little microphone flat on the desk, and they touch, and then their voice goes everywhere. So that's
Wow,
perfect for trying to get a lot of people speaking in such a huge classroom. So
that's
it's hard at the college level to pick your classroom, and
yeah.
when you have large groups, but there are still ways you can do it. You have to work at it, plan ahead, and make it happen. Um, so there's
Yeah.
that in the large classes. Now our introductory proof and theory of interest class, they are 30 to 40 students, let's say, typically. So quite different and
Mhm.
probably more similar in size and classroom layout to what high school teachers would and middle school teachers would encounter. Most often it's them working in groups, small groups, and typically I have titles for each group member and a job description. So again, to try to encourage everyone to jump in and have a
Mhm.
role and a voice. And so sometimes they're doing problems they've seen something similar to, and sometimes they're doing things they haven't seen anything similar to before, because this is an introductory proofing class. And I worked with some collaborators from Texas State, Cody Patterson in particular, on a project in the 2024-25 school year, where they have some great proof activities that are inquiry based. And it starts with pieces of a puzzle that could be fit together and form a proof. And there were
Mhm.
like a series of guided activities that kind of became more first they just basically a reordering puzzle, if you will, but then more of what the students were just playing with something that didn't even tell them what the proof was. They were by the end of the semester, and then they were discovering it and conjecturing and then working on the proof. So there's a lot of that. And sometimes I will just come to class with a stack of markers and a stack of copy paper, and send that out to the groups, because even in the 30 to 40, sometimes I don't have enough board space to put them all at the board. So I give them the
Right.
option of the paper or going to the board. If you have the board space, that's great, because when they stand up there and look at a vertical surface together, thinking changes and thinking pattern changes. And there's also little tricks you can do, like give each group one piece of chalk and go around every now and then and take the chalk away from the person who has it, pass it to someone else. And if you have the chalk, you can't speak. You're the scribe for that moment. And so then the other people have to speak and tell them what. So you can divvy up the work and encourage everybody to work. But yeah, the main thing, especially in like the introductory proofreading courses, is you immediately see the level that each student is thinking and what they're able to generate.
Yeah,
Um,
so I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm having trouble jumping in only because like you're answering all my questions, right? I mean,
okay.
I've got this like I'm sitting here thinking, okay, my next question is going to be, how do you build up proficiency level of your students, right? How do you scaffold this? But then you start talking about how you are passing the chalk or passing the marker around, and you're making sure that they have a guided, inquiry activity to help them gain ideas and proficiency with this. So I mean, you're doing all the things that I hope to hear in the
Mhm.
episode, which is great. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit and just say, why have you chosen to teach this way? Like, why is it that you choose to embrace inquiry in the classroom rather than doing, the direct teaching? I'm going to stand up at the front of the room and just tell you how it is.
Mainly, reflecting again on my own experience, and then when I am teaching, how much more rewarding I find this.
Mhm.
I am a better guide, coach, educator in the classroom. I think that's a better term for me, but I'm better at that when I'm not the only one speaking in the room, when
Right.
I'm doing a lot of listening and responding more to what I'm hearing and asking them questions and making and just really challenging them to think and to phrase and generate mathematics themselves. So I get more reward myself. I find it more engaging for myself and more fun for myself. But then the students, they find it rewarding over the long term. I think I want to say that in order to pull off this sort of thing in either the big class or the smaller classes, beyond inquiry activities and lessons that you design, I find that it takes a lot of community building,
Uh,
very much at the beginning of the semester and then continued throughout, because this may be the first time they've been expected to speak in class or turn and talk to their fellow students. Um, and especially coming out of the pandemic, we found that to be the case. You can't just
yeah.
say the first day, you can't just give a lesson activity and say, turn and work on this with your partner.
Right.
So there's a lot of things I do even one thing before we even get in the classroom, I use a discussion board. I post a picture of myself and my dog and share facts about me and encourage them to introduce themselves to the class there before we even get to the classroom the first day. And then we do a lot of things that help build community. And some of it is just fun and getting to know each other and learning how to communicate with each other. And then we go into the activities that do sometimes require, group work and working together and communicating.
Mhm.
I've been at UT since '07. I've been the undergraduate math faculty advisor since January of 2014. And in that role, I meet primarily with students, but I also meet with prospective employers.
Mhm.
And one thing that every single employer, and even my alumni that I bring back for career panels, every single one of them talks about the need for effective communication.
Mhm.
Talks to my alumni when they come back, say, okay, so I'm the mathematician on the team and I can do all the number crunching. But then I have to talk to I can know a little bit about programming, but I don't actually program. I have to tell the CS expert on the team, let's say, what kind of queries I need them to run on the data. And then they just give me back all this raw data, and I have to crunch all that. But then I have to turn around and interpret to the other team members. And some of them are marketing, and they don't care about the math I just did, other than they trust that I did it
Mhm.
honestly and effectively, but they want to know what the take-home message is. So there's a whole lot of communication that has to happen. The employers say, okay, they got a UT Austin math degree. Yay, we know they can problem solve, but can they communicate? So I tell
Uh,
my students all these stories and I bring it back a career panel at least once a year, sometimes twice a year of alumni. And so I say, this is the why. So the other thing about getting the buy is build community, then give the students why do you want them to talk in class? And so build a community, give them the why. The why is no matter what job you're in, you're going to be in a role where you're going to have to communicate with others. And so we want to give you some low stakes way to build that communication now. And so I'll have students at the beginning of this semester say, oh, I just don't, come to me one on one. I don't think I can speak up in class. And I just say, I was the same way for years. But here's what you need to do. And here's the little steps we're going to take. And then they'll come back to me and say, I'm so glad you pushed me to be
That
more active in speaking in
that's
class.
It's fantastic. I feel like the more I talk to, our series guest speakers about doing inquiry in the classroom, the more I keep hearing about how it's a great way to learn the content, but it's also a great way to push the students, and it's a great way to learn valuable skills that transcend the content. And if we're not doing inquiry in the classroom, we're really doing a disservice to the students, right? Because
Yes.
they're not going to be as well prepared to just be a part of the world, whether that's the math world or the science world or the English world, but just being an active member of whatever profession they go into. If they go through inquiry in the classroom, then they're already going to be building those skills. So, okay, I'm gonna ask a question here because it sounds like you are really, really effective at leading a student through an inquiry-based learning. But I know, at least in the sciences, we can sometimes turn them loose on a question and just let them run with it. And maybe you can talk about your experiences there. But sometimes they also go down a pathway that's not exactly in the right direction. So how do you handle messiness that may come from students or student groups that are going down the wrong pathway? How do you redirect it? How do you handle that?
Depends on what stage you see it at, but if it's when you're
Mhm.
walking around the room, you ask them pointed, directed questions and try to get them to think through what they've done. In the introductory proofwriting classes, particularly, but really in any math class, learning how to critique your work and that of others is another very needed skill to acquire. So, but particularly in the proof class, let's say, so we put things up, we project things, or if they're on the board, or we project them with the dot cam. And then we look through them together and we discuss them. And I don't just take my marker, cross it out, and redo it because they know I've got my degree in math. That doesn't matter, right? That what they can learn and what they can see is the point. So, I put it up and then we go through it. And we usually I have someone presenting it, one of the students, and they're going through. But I have built the environment that everyone in the room needs to remain active. And when you're not the presenter, you're looking at it and you're ready to offer helpful comments or questions or critiques. And at the beginning, I might have say, okay, they might miss it. I might say, let's look at how they began this. Did they remember all the hypotheses to include? I might have to be a little more guided at the beginning, but then
Right.
as the semester goes on, they are finding it. And we talk a lot about how to be respectful in pointing out what needs to be improved, and then they have opportunities to revise certain things, and that's, I think, important too. You can't grade everything if it was all revised, but I give them some assignments and things that they have opportunities to revise, and certainly those group work things. There's a lot of opportunity to revise those,
Yeah.
because the whole point is. And I talk about how our brains learn from mistakes. Share
Mhm.
with them those studies too, and that's really the only way the human brain learns. And
Right.
so, you have to tell them the why again to that too, and I find that to be helpful.
Yeah, so you brought up studies, and I know part of your background is a research focused in math education and around inquiry-based learning. So, can you share some of the evidence around the relationship between using inquiry-based learning and developing a student's conceptual understanding of the mathematics content?
Yes. So there are various studies that show that just always straight up lecturing, we lose the students short term into that
True.
if you've got a 50-minute class or so. But then also what they retain years later. Mike Starboard's a great mentor of mine, and a big thing he always said, what do you want students to remember about your class in 20 years or so? And you really got to think about that because they're possibly not going to remember all of the rote calculations and
Right.
techniques and things that we're trying so hard to impart to them right now. But if they can remember how to organize their logical thinking and argument, like you said before, that's going to transcend your class. But that can be something that they take forward for years. So a lot of that is a benefit to students that studies show we're going to get out. But it also shows that students that might, such as myself, who maybe were for various reasons didn't know anyone that ever had a undergraduate degree, let alone a doctorate degree, didn't see too many mentors that looked like them as in the educational world as they were growing up. Folks like that, being in this environment helps them find their voice and connect and then become creators of math themselves. So
Yeah, I was going to ask that as a follow-up question about, the person who doesn't feel like they're a math person. How does the use of inquiry help them sort of develop a math identity?
if you're really working hard on how you're setting this up in your classroom and monitoring how it's flowing and making sure that there will always be a few students that are, I know, and you gotta help them find ways to continue to grow and excel. So maybe they get a bonus problem to be working on,
Right.
or a little extension of what you've asked the others to do. But you give space for those people that are quiet or didn't think they were a math person to find what they can actually do, and you give them a role and a job in any little activity or project or problem, and you could structure them such that there are things they can do and explore. And it's like in the introductory proofreading class, I talk a lot about how I would think through the problem myself. I try to think out loud a whole lot and tell them that, when I first saw this statement, I would have had no idea how to put it. Okay. And that, in that particular class, what we're going to do is build up a toolbox of techniques you can use. And so, and when you face a new problem you don't know how to do, I just tell them when you face a new proof problem, let's say that you're asked to prove, you don't have any idea where to start. Well, now you've got things in your toolbox. So you take out
Right.
one approach like direct proof and definitions. Look at all the definitions and things you know already. Can you throw any of them at this and get anywhere? If not, okay, don't give up. Try the next thing. Can you try proof by contradiction or contraposition? I just talked through it with them like that by the end of the semester that, okay, look at these as tools you've gained, and also just over and over encouraging and reiterating that the first thing any of us try often doesn't work.
Mhm.
But what's really sets the math person apart from the others is, are you a problem solver? When you see something that's not working out, do you say, oh, I don't know what to do? Or do you say, why didn't that work out? And over the course of the semester, we hope that we convert more of them or encourage them all to be the sort of person that when something doesn't work out, well, we project it in this class and we look at it and figure out why,
Mhm.
because actually figuring out where it didn't work out and why probably gives us the next step forward to try. And
Right.
that we all have to try different approaches, whether it's solving this particular problem in class or it's some other problem in life. We always often have to try multiple approaches till we figure out what will work. And so, just constantly building them up and tell them you can do this. And here, okay, that didn't work. Okay, let's see why didn't that work with them. Over and over
Right.
again, whether it's in student hours or in class. You just build that into that's a function and process of learning we all do, and tell them that you
Right.
do that too, and show them that when you do things on the board and
Yeah.
encourage. Yeah.
I feel like it's really, really important for the teacher to be, there right in the midst of the students to show like, okay, I was in your spot, however many years ago. I was sitting in your chair. I was having to go through this. I was struggling as well. And here is how we can struggle through this together, being the modeler in the front of the room rather than, the you ever heard of sage on a stage, right? That's what
Mhm.
a
Right,
teacher
right.
has described as. So yeah, the person who shows their thinking and models the classroom, I think is probably one of the best roles that a teacher can fall into, especially with their students struggling to find themselves in that classroom. So, okay, we're running out of time here, so I want
Okay.
to kind of turn it back around to some resources. So, if listeners want to learn more about using inquiry-based learning in a mathematics course or about you and your work, where can they find more information?
Sure. So they're welcome to email me. Is that something that you're allowed to share with them? Okay.
Sure, yeah. If
Okay.
you want me to
Yeah, they're
list it, I can.
welcome to email me. And then the COMIT, COMMIT, the San Antonio COMIT, COMIT is for Community for Mathematics Inquiry and Teaching.
Okay.
And so the leaders of that right now include university faculty and a K-12 teacher. And sometimes we're at a high school campus for those meetings. Sometimes we're at a college campus. That's a great community. And I can't go to all of them myself, but I like being on their mailing list and learning about what's going on. So if they just Googled San Antonio COMET, but I could send you the link, that's a good community to be in. And then the Mathematical Association of America has these subgroup for inquiry-based learning, and you can just follow along and see what's going on there as well. I have a lot of these resources that I have accumulated. I try to convert more of our own faculty, so I could share a lot of those with you that you could post out if you want to, but people are welcome
Sure.
to email me, and you can ask to visit someone's classroom. I think we try to do that a lot more in the university than we used to. I still visit people's classroom, and I feel like when I visit someone, I look at what they're doing, and some of the things I see, I'm like, oh, I could never pull that off. But some of the things I see, oh, I could try that, you know. So you just do it with an open mind and see what pieces that you might be seeing from a great educator in this room. What could I try out? What could I pull in and try out? Okay.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice for
Yeah.
for a new teacher, is to go in to as many teachers as possible, observe how they're doing things, and it could be something wildly different. Like you could be teaching math, but go and observe an English classroom because
Right. We
they're
have a
really
day
good
on
at.
campus where we do that in our
Yeah,
College of Natural Sciences, teaching discovery days. And in particular, yeah, you're encouraged to go see different people's classrooms. And yes,
nice.
it's amazing what kind of ideas you can get from other people. Now, I follow a lot of high school teachers in social media because they do a lot of creative, cool things.
They
And
do, yeah.
so I still like to follow a lot of them and see what they're doing in their classes. And then another thing is at UT Austin, one of our outreach is the Mathematics Teachers Circle of Austin. So math circles have a long history around the world, and they are student groups as well as teacher groups. And I don't know where else there are ones in Texas. Do y'all have one? I don't know that you do right now. No.
I don't think we do.
We
No.
need to bring some of the Aggies to us on occasion to speak. But a math teacher circle is where it can be aimed at any level. I've worked with the National Math Teachers Group, and I know people around the U.S. that have it for elementary teachers and so forth. Ours, based out of Austin, is for middle and high school teachers. And we have a workshop once a month, and usually once in the summer, where we bring middle school and high school teachers to campus, and faculty come in the room too, and we sit down together. We have one leader or guide, if you will, and it's very much inquiry-based, the way we run ours. And we secondary teachers and college instructors, we're all in there together as learners, and it's a great community, and we push our boundaries and think about things, and we go through these puzzles and problems together once a month. And the middle and high school teachers get CPE credit. So that's fun. And there may be other places, or if someone's thinking about starting one, I actually was part of a group that put together a guide for starting your circle. So if anyone's interested in those type of groups, they could also let me know about it.
Well, great. Well, I'll do my best to tag as many of those resources as I can within the podcast. That's all the time that we have. Thank you, Dr. Austin, for being a guest today. The Aggie Teach Momentum podcast drops every 2 weeks, so make sure that you are looking for the next episode on Spotify or linked on the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences website. For more information, you can visit our program website at aggieteachartsci.tamu.edu. That is aggieteach, ARTSCI.tamu.edu. Thanks and gig 'em.